Good morning, everyone. As people are starting to arrive, I want to introduce myself. My name is Khanh, and I'm excited to welcome and thank you for joining us for Convening and how we can really better center equity in housing. I'm excited to know that we have over 300 housing champions from across the state representing the public sector, developers, policymakers, investors, philanthropy, journalists, and community partners with us. It's going to take all of us in order to make this happen and really achieve the housing justice that we need in our community. So as we gather today, I want to first acknowledge that it is Cesar Chavez Day. And for many of us, and particularly for me, this is particularly meaningful because I grew up in the neighborhood in the city where Cesar Chavez started his activism. You know, for many of us, Cesar Chavez was a fierce warrior that dedicated his life to improving conditions of the legions of farm workers who kept fresh food on the tables across America. Even in the face of threats and actual violence, Cesar never wavered from his commitment to passive resistance. And today, we hope to honor his legacy and sacrifice by carrying forward the torch of justice to ensure that our community is rooted in equity, inclusion, and opportunity. 2 years ago, when we launched the Partnership for the Bay's Future, we were led by a deeply held belief that we all deserve a decent place to live, that having a home is a matter of basic justice, of who we are as a community. We believe that housing is essential, just like food, healthcare, and education. So this means that we should pass policies and build homes to strengthen our neighborhoods and ensure that residents don't face displacement. The partnership strives to make sure all of us, especially those who have been locked out for generations, have a decent place to come home to. That's the future our community deserves. We know that our whole community does better when everyone has good, safe housing options. We all benefit from housing justice, and so it's up to all of us to fight for it. I now invite you to navigate to baysfuture.org, where we describe how we work. As you can see, first and foremost, the partnership believes that every family has a right to stable, affordable homes. And that can really be accomplished through transformative policy change, pursuing the protection, preservation, and production of housing, and setting a large table for cross-sector collaboration. We'll be regularly updating this site with resources and insights from the field, so please take a moment to bookmark it. Now, I'm delighted to turn it over to a key leader for the Partnership of the Bay's Future, Cindy Wu, Executive Director of Bay Area LISC.
Thank you, Khanh. Good morning. LISC is proud to be in partnership with you all at San Francisco Foundation. First, a little bit about LISC. We are a 40-year-old nonprofit with a history in the Bay Area. We are a local office that is part of a national organization, which structures us to be a champion for self-determination by people of color in their own neighborhoods. We do this by investing in individuals and organizations as part of the community development ecosystem. And we facilitate the creation of community-centered agendas and drive investment toward those agendas. At this 2-year mark for the Partnership for the Bay's Future, we are doubling down on our commitment to be responsive, collaborative, and creative with each of you that are doing work on the ground. I want to highlight for you what we've been able to accomplish in the last 2 years. The big numbers are that we have closed $500 million with our investors and deployed almost $200 million for over 1,700 homes that we have financed. But the stories behind the numbers are what is really important, such as the first time we helped a community developer buy a building to maintain it as affordable housing. And we intend for the speakers today to give a fuller picture of the impact that we are making in affordable housing. For today's agenda, we will start with our keynote to set the stage about the importance of centering equity in this work. We will then move into lessons and innovations learned by our coworkers Aisha and Asha. They will share with you some of the learnings from the partnership's dual strategy of policy change and capital investment. Then you will have a choice of one of 3 panels, and I know you will have a hard time deciding. Big Impact Small Scale is the first, about acquiring tenant-occupied rental housing to prolong its affordability. The second is building housing community power through narrative, about using the tool of storytelling. And the third is local strategies for advancing inclusive housing policies, about how community groups and local government can partner together to bring about legislative change. And finally, we will all come together again for closing reflections from Somos Mayfair Executive Director, Camille Yanes Fontanilla. I look forward to this short and rich time for us to be together today. And back to you, Khanh.
Thank you, Cindy. And thank you again for everyone who's joining us. I'm seeing all the attendees continue to populate. As we begin the conference, I want to remind you to download or sign into Whova. There you can connect with other attendees, learn more about our speakers and presenters, and ask questions of panelists, which will earn you points for prizes. Lastly, I wanted to acknowledge the critical partners and investors that make this work possible. You can learn more about them on baysfuture.org. To kick off our event, we're excited to share with you a video about the impact that we have made in the past year. Following that, Ruby Bolaria-Shifrin, Director of Housing Affordability at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, will introduce our keynote speaker. And then after the keynote, we'll go right into our main stage panel. Thank you.
In the last year, we have learned a lot about justice, equity, and the kind of community we want to be. We've also learned a lot about home. It's a place we find stability, safety, and sanctuary. A place to experience joy, to be ourselves, to work hard, recharge, even build community. Home is at the center of the most personal aspects of our lives, and it's where we get the fuel to face the world. Yet residents across the Bay Area struggle every day to find and hold on to their homes. That's why the Partnership for the Bay's Future is committed to making housing accessible to everyone. When housing policy and investment come together, real change can be made. In the last year, the Bay's Future Fund financed 7 deals that produced new housing for 492 individuals and families, and financed 8 deals that kept housing affordable for more than 460 individuals and families. The Partnership for the Bay's Future also helped preserve housing for dozens of families throughout the Bay Area, with the approval of 18 accessory dwelling units in 6 developments. This housing innovation provides affordable housing units on existing properties in high-demand areas. The partnership also awarded its first round of grants, working with more than 50 community organizations to champion equitable housing policies that prevent people from being displaced. We launched the Community Housing Fund that builds houses for those who earn extremely low income and who are disproportionately people of color. And in a year with unique challenges, the partnership worked with allies across various sectors and engaged tens of thousands of community members to raise awareness and support for this work. In the last year alone, the Partnership for the Bay's Future has invested $177 million, creating or preserving more than 950 units of housing for families across our 5 counties. The Partnership for the Bay's Future is working to realize the real value of home: equity, inclusion, opportunity. Ensuring everyone has a home has the incredible potential to transform lives and to realize our full potential, not just as individuals, but also as a community.
Hi everyone, my name is Ruby Bolaria-Shifrin and I am the Director of the Housing Affordability Program at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We're a proud founding member of the Partnership for the Bay's Future and really a big advocate for this type of innovation and collaboration that brings people from across sectors together to find lasting, equity-centered solutions to really tough problems like the housing and homelessness crisis. While I wish we were all together in person for this convening, I love knowing that there are hundreds of you, from advocates to business leaders, who are joining us virtually today to focus on equity-centered solutions for the housing crisis. So what does that mean? For us, it's really 3 things. One is we must recognize the foundation of racial and economic segregation on which our housing system was designed. This has and continues to disproportionately affect communities of color and low-income residents. Second, when discussing the 3 Ps, producing more housing, protecting tenants, and preserving existing affordable housing, we must root the conversation in access and opportunity to the most vulnerable. And third, we must continue to build the public and political will necessary for policy change and housing investments to not only happen, but to actually last for the long term. So before we dive in today, I am thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker, David Williams, who is going to ground us in the task ahead. David is the Director of Policy Outreach at Opportunity Insights, a research and public policy lab based at Harvard University, dedicated to using data to improve upward mobility in America. In his role, he supports research and policy efforts, including programs like Creating Moves to Opportunity, a national housing mobility initiative, which David can speak more about. Prior to Opportunity Insights, David was senior advisor to the mayor of Detroit, where he managed large-scale real estate and community development projects, neighborhood planning initiatives, and policies related to economic mobility, land use, and equitable development. He also has a JD from Harvard Law and has served as an affordable housing community development attorney, as well as a consultant for nonprofit management. So with that, I'll pass the mic to David. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you.
Hello. Once again, my name is David Williams, and I serve as the Director of Policy Outreach for Opportunity Insights. I'd like to thank the Partnership for the Bay's Future for inviting me here today, and I'll take a few minutes to talk about how we can use data and research to create the innovation, accountability, and impact we need to truly build communities of opportunity across the Bay Area and across the country. To start, I'd like to pose a question. Are we as a society and as a country living up to the ideal of the American dream? Take a moment to think about that. But as you do think about that, another question. How do we actually measure a concept like that? Right? The idea that if you work hard and provide for your family, that your children will grow up to have more opportunities than you. So something we've done at Opportunity Insights is we've used historic IRS tax data to really test out that idea. And what we see is that for individuals born in the 1940s, the idea of upward mobility of the American dream was a virtual guarantee. Over 90% of individuals born in that decade grew up to earn more than their parents. But that's changed dramatically. So much so that when you get to folks who are in the workforce today who were born in the 1980s, that guarantee of prosperity is more or less a coin flip. You basically have a 50-50 shot now of growing up to earn more than your parents. In many ways, we feel that that's at the core of a lot of the political and cultural frustration that we see today, and we work to use our research to identify ways to reverse these trends. Something we also see is that place matters. An opportunity differs dramatically based on where you grow up. This map shows economic mobility rates for every region in the country. And what you see is that in places in the middle of the country, in the Great Plains, on the coast, in the Northeast, and in the Bay Area, these areas of blue, we have very high rates of upward mobility. Right? So on average, kids who grow up in low-income families in these places are earning upwards of $30,000, $40,000, $45,000. Very high rates of upward mobility, higher than any country that we have data for. But you see these areas in deep red. In the Southeast, places like Charlotte and Atlanta. In the Midwest, places like Cleveland and my hometown of Detroit, where on average, kids are unable to rise out of poverty. If they grow up in low-income families, they usually end up being low-income adults. And these outcomes are what pushed me to return to my hometown. I served as an affordable housing lawyer in Boston for several years, but then I moved back home to Detroit to work in the mayor's office. And I came back at a very fortuitous time. When I started in the mayor's office, we were just entering into the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. Over the past 50 years, the city had lost 1 million people in terms of population. Since the year 2000, 1 in every 3 single-family homes was lost to tax foreclosure. The city had suffered through over a half century of abandonment, and we were tasked with a major course correction, rebuilding a city suffering from decades of physical trauma. I was proud to play a small part in that moment, a moment where Detroit was able to leverage entering into bankruptcy and hitting rock bottom. Out of necessity, we had to break down silos, uniting local government, city and county, along with the nonprofit, philanthropic, and corporate worlds, to think big. We created a citywide plan that aligned resources and effort in strategically targeted neighborhoods, allowing us to begin to physically rebuild in a sustainable way. And we've seen progress. Less blight, restored parks, property values rising, new residents and investments coming back into the city. But as new development took place, there was still an open question. Were we truly transforming the life outcomes of our most vulnerable families and children? At Opportunity Insights, we've challenged ourselves to use our resources to ask and answer those types of questions. How can we transform lives and break intergenerational cycles of poverty at the local and national level? Unlike Detroit, Charlotte has been an economic success story. Home to thousands of jobs at companies like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, Charlotte has grown tremendously over the past 20 years. But despite that prosperity, according to our research, Charlotte has even lower economic mobility rates than cities like Detroit. Children raised in low-income families in Charlotte only have around a 4% chance of growing up to become high-income adults, the lowest rate of upward mobility of the 50 biggest metros across the country. The research shows that economic growth and prosperity does not automatically equal equity. Real investments in human capital development are needed to ensure that children and families are connected to the prosperity and opportunity that exists in their own backyards. Instead of being defensive or paralyzed by the scope of the problem, the civic community in Charlotte took the 50 out of 50 ranking as a call to action. Led by organizations like the Foundation for the Carolinas, the community dug into the issue and dedicated itself to understanding how their prosperity could be channeled to create opportunity for all. We've had the pleasure of working with a wide range of stakeholders in Charlotte, and their work has turned into real action. A new housing bond has tripled the community's investment in affordable housing. The city and county are moving towards universal pre-K coverage, and they're piloting initiatives aimed at deconcentrating poverty and reversing segregation. Although there's much work to be done to one day eventually change that 50 out of 50 ranking, Charlotte used that data point in that moment to elevate real public conversation around equity and build the political will and resources needed to make real change. As you're all most likely aware, the Bay Area exists on a different end of the spectrum. Our research showed that those same types of kids growing up in low-income families, but being raised in a community like San Jose, had an almost 13% chance of becoming high-income adults. Rates much more akin to Canada and Denmark than Charlotte and Detroit. But as you all most likely also know, many of the factors that created opportunity for kids growing up in the 90s and early 2000s in the communities across the Bay Area have changed dramatically. Unlike cities in the Midwest like Detroit that have struggled with job and population loss, the Silicon Valley boom has led to ills of a different sort. Housing shortages, skyrocketing rents, and growing inequality. Our data shows that kids that grow up in San Jose and San Francisco earn more when they stay in the region. But as it becomes harder to keep an economic foothold locally, prospects for upward mobility decline. And as we see in much of the country, marginalized communities are often unable to fully tap into and benefit from the opportunities in their communities. So for example, this map again looks at rates of upward mobility, but it specifically looks at outcomes for Black and white men. And it's important to note that these maps are on the same color scale. What that means is that almost every region of the country, Black and white men that grow up in low-income families, in the same communities, even in the same neighborhoods on the same blocks, have very different average outcomes. And those disparities in the Bay Area are especially stark. Black men on average are earning $12,000 less than their white counterparts. We must remain cognizant and vigilant of how our communities and systems disparately impact different communities. Make sure that we tailor and shape our responses to ensure they do not further perpetuate historical legacies of racial discrimination, and that they actively combat the racial bias in our communities that continues to shape outcomes to this day. And without dramatic intervention, COVID-19 will undoubtedly exacerbate the growing inequality that we see. Although the employment rates for high-income workers across the country have returned to pre-pandemic levels, the recession is still very real for lower-income workers. As of last month, over 30% of lower-wage workers in San Francisco were still unemployed compared to January of 2020. But despite these deeply concerning statistics, I'm heartened by the deeply optimistic and ambitious work you all are doing to ensure that a new generation of children get to benefit from the opportunities that exist in the Bay Area. As we strive to create a more livable community where everyone has access to high-quality, affordable housing, I would suggest thinking about these three things: innovation, accountability, and impact. Let's use the moment to collaborate across silos and test new innovative solutions. After a year acknowledging our country's racial fault lines, after dealing with incredible political unrest and struggling through a global pandemic, let's think boldly about new solutions. Whether it's zoning reform, new housing models or construction techniques, or better uses of existing resources, let's think big now that we know the status quo is no longer sustainable. But while we think and act big, let's hold ourselves accountable and make sure that we're evaluating everything we try out to make sure that our good intentions are really having the impact that our communities need. And let's ensure that we use the lessons we do learn now to create the broader systemic and policy change needed to create broad impact and a sustainable long-term path forward. At Opportunity Insights, our data showed that important affordable housing resources, like housing choice vouchers that provide rental subsidies to low-income families, were disproportionately being used in high-poverty neighborhoods, places that our data show oftentimes have much worse outcomes for the kids who grow up there. And in many ways, this was perpetuating the legacies of redlining and residential segregation that have shaped our communities across the country. So we partnered with the King County and Seattle housing authorities in Washington state to pilot an innovative housing counseling model to test if it could effectively support low-income families using vouchers during their rental search process and potentially help them gain access to a broader range of neighborhoods and housing opportunities. And to hold ourselves accountable, we ran a randomized evaluation. We found that the program was indeed effective. Families who received these housing counseling services were almost 4 times more likely to move to areas that had higher outcomes for low-income children. Places that were traditionally very difficult to access for lower-income families, especially those using public assistance and housing choice vouchers. And it's very heartening that this evidence has actually not just impacted these individual families, but has helped shape conversations at a national level, leading to a demonstration program funded by HUD that will provide the resources to test similar approaches in communities across the country and hopefully lead to better leveraging the billions of dollars we spend every year on the voucher program. Now, I use this as just one example to illustrate how we can think about local issues, pair rigorous data and research with practitioner perspective to create innovative solutions, and then pair that with advocacy efforts to create real, scalable impact. And this is because the stakes could not be bigger. Not just to create a more livable Bay Area, but to create a region that's positioned to help our country face a new generation of challenges that 2020 helped crystallize. In the 20th century, Detroit became a center of automotive innovation and attracted people looking for opportunity from across the world. But that manufacturing might and industrial spirit also powered the war effort. It fueled the union movement and built the middle class, and led to one of our country's greatest exports, Motown. In this century, the Bay Area should not only be home to the tech companies who are helping redefine our future, but it should be an incubator for the homegrown talent that's ready to innovate and solve the next generation of problems that our country will be facing. Place, community, neighborhood, and exposure to those places really matters. Kids growing up in areas like San Jose and San Francisco with already high levels of innovation are much more likely to become inventors and innovators themselves. But unfortunately, even high-aptitude, low-income kids and children of color are much less likely to become inventors than their wealthier counterparts. And that statistic will only become worse if our children lose access to traditional hubs of opportunity and innovation like the Bay Area. Let's make the investments in housing that we need now to build healthy, integrated neighborhoods and communities that center equity, promote stability, and expose children to opportunity. Our future depends on it. Thank you.